Before I turn the program over to Pat White, I'd like to thank Midwest One. Midwest One has done a wonderful job in helping to support this program. They paid for the brochure and the moving of the murals to the library and the refreshments that we'll have after the program is over. And they've just been a wonderful supporter, and as you learned tonight, they had an earlier role in the murals. I would also like to thank Pat White for his work in bringing this evening's program together. Irving Weber would be proud of all that Pat has done to keep Iowa City's history at the forefront. Tonight's Weber Day program is devoted to the 8 Pelzer murals depicting early Iowa City history that hung in the Jefferson Hotel. I know, well, I think, that if Irving Weber were here, he would be able to tell us many stories of the murals, the artist, and the Jefferson Hotel. Luckily, we have others here tonight who can help share the story of Mildred Pelzer and the Jefferson Hotel murals. Pat.
Thank you, Maeve, and thank all of you for coming. The library is probably fairly grateful for the weather this evening. A week ago tonight, as part of their Weber session, they spent the entirety of it in the storm cellar here at the library, heeding the warnings to go away. Most frequent question I've been asked since I've gotten involved in this is, what exactly is your role, Pat, or how did you get involved in this? And the truth is, as in lots of things in life, there's not a good explanation. It probably started for me back in 1948, 1950, 1952. I grew up on the east side of Iowa City, along with 2 sisters who are sitting in the back row tonight. And it was not, Iowa City, not unlike the world, was a very different place than it is today. And it was not unusual for me to hop on a bicycle and go downtown to watch a Western serial or a movie at the Englert or the Varsity or the Strand or the Iowa or the Capitol and wander around to Fort Hopkins for a Coke, or into the lobby of the Jefferson Hotel, where these murals hanging on the wall always caught my attention. I just was taken by them from a very early age. Well, time went on, obviously, and a couple of years ago, I became aware of the school district's plan to close Longfellow School for a period of 15 months. You will see or experience or hear about as soon as the students leave Longfellow in a couple of weeks, the construction crews are going to go in for a hoped-for 15-month construction period. Many people in the school district have fingers and lots of other appendages crossed that construction weather abides the 15-month time period and there aren't delays in supplies. But I thought, you know, during this 15-month period, unless somebody has a better idea, they're going to box these murals up that have been at Longfellow, and you'll hear more about how they got there. So I went to the school district. They didn't know who I was. The current administration, starting with the superintendent and most of the central administration staff, came to Iowa City long after I retired in 2006, and all they really knew was that this old retired guy is coming in with a proposal that they give somebody their 2 murals that are at Longfellow, and I assume they checked me out and found out that I was trustworthy. I particularly want to mention Craig Hansel, who's the chief financial officer for the school district. Initially, when I started calling and emailing, they didn't know who to send me to or what to do with me. And finally, I got an email back from Craig Hansel saying, I'll meet with you to hear what you have in mind. And Craig and every person in the school district, including the 7 members of the school board, the superintendent, Dwayne Van Hemert, who's in charge of their physical plant, they have just been very gracious and cooperative all the way through this. And so the day they said yes to me, I said, okay, Pat, now you've got to figure out where they're going to go. I didn't at that point have a place. And they're 4 feet high and 12 feet long, so there are not too many living rooms that would accommodate them. And I first intended, my first thought was Midwest One Bank, as they had been, as you'll hear, they had been involved. Well, unbeknownst to me, their remodeling had really changed the configuration of their lobby, and they didn't really have space either. So I next thought, in consultation with Amy Hospodarsky at Midwest One and Kristen Summerwell, who's sort of in charge of supervising all the artwork at Midwest One, what about public facilities? And the first two I thought of were the library and the senior center, as they had some physical proximity to the seniors, to a Jefferson hotel where they came from. So I don't know whether I called her or emailed her, but I went to Susan to see if I could find somebody who would latch on to this kind of goofy idea, and she was quick to say yes. She was really excited about this project right from the start. And she and her staff have just been wonderful throughout this, as has been Linda Copping, who's the coordinator at the senior center, and her staff. You've heard Midwest One Bank mentioned. I'm going to talk now about the commission and a little bit about how this mural got to the Iowa City Public Library. In 1934, the Jefferson Hotel, to its great credit, eventually it has less credit when it came time to take these down and figure out what to do with them, but to its great credit, commissioned an Iowa City artist who lived on Feddersen Avenue by the name of Mildred Pelzer to do these 8 murals, which it hung in the lobby of the Jefferson Hotel. Mildred's husband was Lewis, who was a history professor at the University of Iowa. And lots of people assume, both by the look of the murals and the time, that these were WPA projects, but they were not. They were commissioned from the Jefferson Hotel directly to Mildred Pelzer. When the Jefferson approached her, she and her husband had a dinner meeting with Carl Jessup, who was then the president, or Walter Jessup rather, who was then the president of the University of Iowa. He was the president for 18 years, hence Jessup Hall. Also in attendance at this dinner were Benjamin Shambaugh Auditorium, and his wife Bertha, who's a kind of an artist, photographer, historian in her own right, specializing in a Manna history. Carl Seashore, who was then the dean of the Graduate College, and his wife, and a local lawyer by the name of Charles Dutcher, who was affiliated with the Jefferson Hotel. And of course, Mildred and Lewis were there. And they talked about what the mural should be and what they should represent, and they came up with the theme of transportation. One word, transportation. And if you look at all 8 of the murals, and some of them you have to stretch a little bit, but they really do all have a connection, and they're all depicted in the brochure that's available. I hope most of you picked up. So there's a theme running through all these murals of transportation. Well, the 60s arrived. The Jefferson decided to remodel, took the murals down and sort of let them go to the wind. In the very early 70s, the University of Iowa bought what is now called the Jefferson Building, was then called the Jefferson Hotel, for office space. They didn't particularly care to manage or use the ground floor retail space. The Jefferson Hotel had been a real hub of downtown Iowa City ever since its construction. And the university, wisely I suspect, decided that they wanted to try to continue the experience of retail businesses on the main floor. And it appears, we're not absolutely certain about this, but it appears that they went to the trust department at what was then Iowa State Bank and Trust, the then Iowa State Bank and Trust is a far different creature than today's Midwest One Bank. Today's Midwest One Bank has expanded, acquired other facilities, their total banking range goes into other states, including, although it's still called Midwest One Bank, a couple of branches in Florida. Well, their trust department, which managed some real estate, included a gentleman who's with us tonight, George Dane. I'm going to ask him, I won't ask him to stand, but I'll ask him to wave here in a minute. And it came to him to manage this retail first floor and basement space at the Hotel Jefferson, which the university had acquired. And so one of the things he did was walk over there to survey the property that he was going to try to lease out and oversee. And in the basement of the Jefferson, he found, rolled up by his memory, Railroad Arrives and Stage Ready. Railroad Arrives hangs in this facility tonight, and Stage Ready now down the street at the Senior Center. He went to, I think at the time, the president of the bank was Bill Somerville. We're one of the members of the Somerville family is present this evening. Dick, the president emeritus, chairman of the board emeritus, I guess, too. George convinced Bill to spend the bank's money to refurbish these murals. And they spent somewhere in excess of $10,000 in 1970 money. That was quite a bit. To refurbish them, make them presentable, and eventually George decided, whether he consulted with others is not clear, or whether this was entirely his own idea, that he would call the then librarian at Longfellow School and see if she, they were all women in those days, all the librarians, was interested in these 4x12 murals, and somehow he convinced her that Longfellow ought to take these two. Now, his decision to contact Longfellow was not just out of the blue. As the story goes, Longfellow, before it was built in 1913 or 1917, 50, 60 years before that, was a Civil War training camp for Northern soldiers to be. And even when they got there to train in the early 60s, locomotives were still fairly rare. And obviously you could both hear them coming and see the steam engine coming as well. And when they would hear or see one coming, the story goes, they would break camp, their training camp at Longfellow, and race over about a block and a half to where the railroad tracks still are located, just south of Sheridan Avenue, to watch this locomotive. So, i.e., here's a connection between Railroad Arrives, New Year's Eve of 1855, New Year's Day of 1856, and Longfellow School. Well, they've been hanging at Longfellow School then since the early 70s until Friday, May 12th, when we, well, they were actually crated up a couple of days before that, but we, school district brought them to the alley behind the library and in the front door of the senior center, and a local craftsman that I don't know if any of you have heard of, but he's a local treasure. Will Thompson is his name, doing business as Armadillo Arts. And he describes himself as a museum designer. I describe him as a craftsman. I had used him back in 2001 when Judge Russell and I and others were on a committee that celebrates Itsu. We're on a committee to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Johnson County Courthouse. Well, Will and Armadillo Arts are still in business, and he was a big help in inspecting and hanging these pictures. You'll see the one upstairs, but the one at the senior center took more of a physical effort. It's up off the ground in the assembly room, so it took a couple ladders and a lift, and Even yours truly was holding that mural, helping hold the mural for a while. All right, I should have said when we finish, we'll invite questions from the audience, and we'll have a microphone which you'll need to speak into. Our next speaker tonight is Chris Pisarik, who's the principal at Longfellow. Chris grew up in eastern Iowa, attended the University of Iowa, where he got his undergraduate degree and his teaching certificate. His first teaching job with that degree and certificate was at Longfellow School, where he became the 5th and 6th grade teacher at Longfellow. Into his tenure there as a teacher, he decided he was interested in becoming an administrator and enrolled in the educational administration program that Drake University offers, and he received an educational administrative degree from Drake in 2005. His first administrative position in 2006 was at Truman Elementary in Cedar Rapids, and 2 years after that, in 2008, the Iowa City School District had a vacancy and was looking for a principal at Longfellow, and was delighted to welcome back an ex-teacher. And so Chris became the principal at Longfellow and has been there since 2008. And I should say, I don't remember exactly whether it was 3 or 4 years ago, but he and Becky Furlong, who was at the time an associate superintendent in the Iowa City School District, hosted a retired prosecutor's interest in these murals long before I knew the school was going to close, by giving me a little tour and showing me where the murals hung. And the one of them, stage ready, hung right near the banister that I used to slide down. I'm a Longfellow alum, and the banister looked exactly as it did in the late 40s, early 50s, except much of the varnish had been rubbed off. So, Chris, welcome, and have a word or two to say, please.
Thank you for having me this evening. I appreciate this opportunity. I was wondering how that banister lost the varnish, so we'll probably have to talk after this. As Mr. White alluded to, until now, these murals have been housed in our library in the main stairwell area, where children and parents and staff and numerous visitors have been able to pass by and admire them every day. And currently, plans are underway for the paintings to be cleaned and reframed, and really, Mr. White deserves all the credit for his efforts with this entire process. So again, Mr. White, we appreciate you. Thank you. We can't wait to see those results. We're very pleased that we're going to be able to share these with the larger Iowa City community over the course of the next year, 15 months. Whether you know it or not, I think Mr. White alluded to it earlier. Our community is providing Longfellow with a tremendous gift. The building, which opened on September 9th, 1918, we're undergoing a major remodeling project. 98% of what exists in the interior right now is scheduled to be redone. We're going to be upgrading electrical, heating, and cooling systems, adding an elevator along with other ADA compliant components. I'd like to thank Will Downing, who's in the audience. He's our main man on this project, so thank you, Will. The staff is thrilled that there's going to be more than one staff restroom in the building, so thank you. They were happy at that. They didn't care about the elevator or anything else. As a part of this process, in order to keep our kids safe and our community together, which is very important to me, we're going to be moving to the new Hoover building that's being built out on American Legion Road. We'll be out there for the next 15 months. My fingers are crossed. In order to allow crews to accomplish what they need to on our project. And I'd like to take just a moment to recognize how fortunate I feel that our community is not only going to remain safe, we're not having to educate kids and try to figure out playground space around all this construction. We get to do it in a safe place, and we get to do it together. I'd really like to thank, at this time as well, our entire Longfellow family, our entire community, and all the folks who are helping us navigate through these waters. I really appreciate that. When we come back, we'll have renovated 98% of that interior, and we're also adding about an additional 21,000 square feet to our existing 34,000 square feet. So we'll be a little bit bigger than we were. We look forward to housing Ms. Pelzer's pieces in the new Fine Arts wing of the building. We're going to plan to proudly display those high up on the walls in our multi-purpose room. We're reopening the stage in there. We're really looking forward to this, and those are going to be some centerpieces within that place, and so we hope people are able to come back for generations. I would also encourage you that are out here tonight, if you're interested, look for information about our open house. We're going to schedule that to celebrate more than 100 years of learning when we return in the fall of 2018. You're all invited. This is it. In addition to the open house, we plan to partner, obviously, with our community. We expect there'll be many opportunities for visitors to come and see not only the building, but these beautiful pieces. Please know that you're welcome anytime, and please stop in. If you have a story, please stop by my office. I'd love to hear it. I'm not as quite a history buff as Mr. White. I'm hoping to get there someday, though. With that, I'm going to turn things back over to Mr. White. Thank you again for having me here this evening. I feel very fortunate to be part of such a wonderful community. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I want to take a minute to talk about the mural itself. For those of you who haven't realized it, the mural is on the second floor, and when we adjourn the proceedings tonight, you're certainly invited to go up and take a look at it for real. If you look to the right side, bottom right side of that mural, you'll see a figure with his right hand in the air. Now, remember, as you will see from the brochure, that's we think that's LeGrand Byington. That represents a consultation between myself and Bob Hibbs and Randall Schroeder, who's the librarian at the State Historical Society over at the corner of Iowa Avenue and Gilbert. He was a bit of a character, and he was involved in, as the brochure will tell you, there was a prize of $50,000, which in 1855-56 money was a heck of a lot of money, for getting a railroad line to Iowa City by New Year's Day of 1856. And LeGrand had an interest in the railroad, and he is supposedly depicted there along with Peter Dye, who you'll probably recognize that name. There still is a building at the it's the southeast corner of Iowa and Clinton, named the Dye Building. LeGrand Byington had quite an influence on Iowa City in those times, besides encouraging the railroad and encouraging Iowa City to win the prize. He was a bit of a real estate magnate. He was a publisher. I think he was born in Connecticut, worked his way west, ending up in Iowa City. There's actually a town named LeGrand after LeGrand Byington in central Iowa, over near Marshalltown, I believe. Well, in any event, we have an unannounced treat tonight, in that LeGrand has been able to join us. I see him seated in the back of the room. And LeGrand, would you mind sharing a few words with the group?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Good to be here. Hello. Thank you, Mr. White. And it's wonderful to be back here in Iowa City. some 110 years after my demise. I must say, I had the opportunity today to walk around our fair city, and it was wonderful to see again, brought back so many fond memories. But some things have changed mightily. For instance, well, there's nary a horse and buggy to be seen anymore. And some buildings downtown are raising higher and higher to the sky. And everyone I encountered, although very friendly, seemed to all have their noses in these small little black boxes, seemingly talking to themselves. Now, you'll forgive me if I do refer to my notes. Recalling events from 161 years ago puts a tax on the memory. And just like the tax that was levied on me at the Civil War, well, that's not a tax that I'm willing to pay, but I digress. I'm here to talk about a momentous time in Iowa City, when rail service came to town. It was the early 1850s, and myself and several other luminaries, dignitaries from Johnson County, politicians, businessmen, lawyers, we realized that in order to ensure continued trade in a booming and bustling America, we needed to be at the forefront of this new transportation means. So we met with officials in Davenport to discuss a rail line to connect to Iowa City from Chicago and the east. We had to act with great haste because Muscatine was also vying to be a connecting line and a gateway into Iowa and the expanding world, which was the New West. Well, our efforts paid off. And we were signed a contract with the Mississippi and Missouri Railroad Company to build a line into Iowa City by the end of 1855. To sweeten the deal and to ensure swift completion, a $50,000 bonus was provided by the citizens of Iowa City to be paid to the M&M Railroad if they could deliver a steam locomotive and a train of cars by the 1st of January in 1856. Well, on the evening of December 31st, and into the next day, despite temperatures dipping into the -20s, and aided by Iowa Cityans who not only helped to lay the rail, but they cheered on the progress. Bonfires for warmth and light, and sheer determination, the goal was met. Iowa City now had a connecting line into the town, and they had their eyes on the horizon and a new west. Commerce for Iowa City would flourish. Now, I was honored to be the speaker of the day at a opening reception and ceremony and banquet on January 3rd of 1856 in the Hall of Representatives right up the street in our state capitol. There were acclaimed guests from throughout the Midwest and out east celebrating our rail triumph. With cannons booming, the first locomotive pulled into Iowa City. Now, fellow citizens, I cannot stress how important this endeavor was to both Iowa City and to the state of Iowa, and I am very, very proud to have been part of it. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's been very wonderful spending a few moments with you tonight, but I need to go and find the Johnson County Temperance Society and see what can be done about this scourge alcohol. It seems like everywhere you look throughout Iowa City, there's taverns and drinking establishments. I also need to stop by the COD Steam Laundry, I believe, over on Iowa Avenue, which, incidentally, was the first location of the Iowa City Public Library in 1897. Ms. Clark? Second floor, 1,300 books. Yes, yes. Mm-hmm. I have to stop by there and pick up a pair of trousers I dropped off in 1904. I'm hopeful that they're done by now. I still have the ticket. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you. Some of you, I'm sure, recognize Rip Russell as having portrayed LeGrand. Thank you again, Rip. Rip is a sometimes actor at Riverside Theater, at the Iowa City Community Theater. Currently has a gig in Pella, Iowa, performing a play written by Mary Swander named Vang, V-A-N-G. I don't have dates and times, I'm sorry to say, but they're probably next Wednesday.
And then September.
Thank you, Rip. Thank you very much, Rip. I want to add before I forget relative to Longfellow School, if you drive by, you'll see a stone monument on the southeast corner, southeast from the building. It has a plaque on it commemorating Camp Pope. So there is an actual historical tie to Camp Pope. Our next and final speaker is the one person who actually knows about art. Sean Ulmer is the director of the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. Sean is a graduate of Toledo University, got his MA in art history at The Ohio State University, has 25 years of experience in art museums, starting at Ohio State, moving on to the University of Michigan, Cornell University, and he came about 12 years ago to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art, where he became its director about 4 years ago. And he's been kind enough to join us tonight to talk about Pelzer and some of the Pelzer murals that are in his collection in Cedar Rapids. Sean?
Thank you. That helps. Thank you, Pat. And thank you to the Iowa City Public Library for housing this wonderful mural, which I hope you have a chance to see after tonight's presentation. And thank you to Longfellow for your willingness to lend the mural to a larger public. The Pelzer murals are extraordinary, and I'm very, very pleased that they will be shared by a larger group of individuals. Now I need to bring up my presentation. There we go. Now, some of you know the story of Mildred Pelzer well, and for others, she is an unknown quantity. She is one of the unsung artists of Iowa, and so rather than be presumptuous, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about her before we dive into her work. Mildred was born in 1889 in Wisconsin. That puts her in the generation of Grant Wood and Marvin Cone, who both were born in 1891. So keep that in mind as we go through her career, in that she is of that same generation. At the age of 2, her family moved to Dillon, Montana, and she graduates from Montana State Normal School in 1909, and then proceeds off to the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, which is known for its really exceptional programs in engineering, architecture, and fine arts. And she studies there for 2 years, graduating in 2 years, and then returning to Montana, where she is hired by the Montana School for the Deaf, Blind, and Backward Children. Now, I always pause at the backward children. I'm not quite sure who determines what a backward child is and exactly what a backward child looks like. But I think she was on to them because immediately after one term, she leaves and goes back to Columbia University to get more education and then teaches in Indiana, eventually becoming the director of the art department, the Dakota State Normal School in Madison, South Dakota. Now, while she was at Montana State, she met her future husband, Louis Pelzer, who had already settled in Iowa City, was teaching in the history department here. They are married in Dillon, and then she moves here. They have 2 sons, and in the meantime, she continues her artistic studies and creates a wide range of works. We are going to look at a variety of those works, and including the 1934 Commission for the Jefferson Hotel Murals, the 1935 Symphony of Iowa mural, which resided at the Iowa City Press Citizen Building, and as well her post office mural, her only WPA piece, which was created in 1937 for the Waverly Post Office. She was also co-founder of the Iowa Artists Association in 1940. Tragically, both of her sons were killed in World War II, and her husband dies of a heart attack in 1946. So the mid-40s were a very bad time for her, and so she explores different opportunities. She takes commissions and projects in Florida, Hawaii, and then some in Iowa. She actually moves to Hawaii in 1949, then settles in Florida in 52, where she marries Major General George Arthur Lynch, with whom she has a 10-year marriage. And then after he passes away in 1962, she continues to live in Florida, in and about the Orlando area, until her own death in 1985 at the age of 95. Very long and very productive career. However, this does not tell you much about Mildred Pelzer. These are just the facts of her life. Who was Mildred Pelzer really? Well, we see a picture of her here standing in front of a floral a painting of hers. And actually, floral paintings were something that she became really well known for. We think of her in terms of the murals for the Jefferson Hotel, but actually one of her sort of staples was floral paintings. So much so that she actually graces the cover of the Better Homes and Gardens July 1934 issue with one of her florals. This is the same year, and in fact, exactly the same time that she's working on the murals. But she had really accomplished so much success in the area of floral painting that she was kind of one of those go-to people for floral paintings. This is an unfortunately tragic image of one of her florals. This is Zinnias in our collection at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. It's an unframed work that is actually in need of some conservation. Here's another view of it. It has yellowed. The varnish layer has turned on us, and so is in desperate need of some cleaning. But you can see that her work, especially in its detail, is quite remarkable. She's very much under the sway in the teens and 20s of American Impressionism. European avant-garde art is known in the United States, but it's not readily accepted. The Armory show of 1913 in New York, which traveled to Chicago, introduced American artists to what was going on in Europe. But American artists were still very much caught up in another European movement, Impressionism. And so from about 1890 through the 1920s and into the 1930s even, American Impressionism was the most popular art form. And so you see with her daubs of color, the way she's trying to capture light falling upon these flower heads. Is anyone in the audience here an artist? Oh, come on. Got to be one in a crowd like this. Yes, okay. Anybody do any florals? Florals are deceptively straightforward paintings, but they're actually extraordinarily difficult to do. You try to capture a flower head, but you need to capture it in perspective. It needs to have recession. Each petal needs to have its own substance, its own weight. And Pelzer was a masterful artist at capturing that in her work by using a very loose brushwork, a very impressionistic brushwork, trying to capture this arrangement at this particular moment in time. Here's another work, Chrysanthemums, from our collection. And you can see, again, a wonderful arrangement. It is not at all surprising that most of the best floral painters were women. Most of the best gardeners were women. And the art of flower arranging was dominated by women. And so it's not surprising that most of the great floral painters were women as well. Here in detail, you can see some of her brushwork in the mums themselves, but also how beautifully she uses that impressionistic technique to capture the pearls, the string of pearls, and their reflection in the tabletop. This floral still life is in a private collection in Kingston. It actually is available. It's on eBay right now. So if any of you are interested, you can jump on this. The frame has to go, but the painting itself is great, especially when you see the details. And these details are actually better than my details of my own paintings. You can see here her wonderful, masterful handling of the pigment and the way in which she has given you just the impression of these gorgeous flowers. And you can just see really her hand at work and in the sort of the final surface of the work itself. And here an undated work that is also out on the market currently, Asters. And here's a later work. This is definitely after 1952 because on the back of this piece she's written her address in Orlando. So we know it was after she settled in Florida in 1952, but when exactly it's not clear. But she generally moves into abstraction in the later 50s and early 60s. This is a piece that was recently sold in an auction in Sarasota, and I thought it was quite a striking piece where she takes what she's done earlier in her florals and distills it and makes it even more abstract. As I mentioned earlier, floral painting was an area that tended to see a lot of women artists. This is Nellie Gabers, who is another Iowa artist, settled largely in Waterloo, was a farm wife who painted. She had studied at the Cummings School in Des Moines. She also studied at the Stone City Art Colony under Grant Wood. Here, some wonderful lilies, very similar to the kinds of lilies that we saw in the introductory photo of Mildred Pelzer at the beginning of my talk. And this is a watercolor by Leila Powers Briggs, who studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, settled in Waterloo where she met her husband. Eventually she and her husband took over the family farm. And so in her spare time between raising her boys and working on the farm, she painted exclusively in watercolor. Here, a wonderful still life with corn on one of her kitchen chairs. And again, sort of it was one of those genres, florals and still lifes were one of the genres that tended to be dominated by women, especially here in Iowa. But not only women. Grant Wood rarely did a floral, and this is one example of it. And it's the exact same time frame that we're talking about here, the 1920s. It's not an area in which he excelled. He's certainly known for different kinds of work, but he, like many artists, tried their hands because doing a floral was a great challenge. Or here, a little bit more successful, is his calendulas, a really extraordinary arrangement of flowers in a pot that he owned against a background, a kind of wallpaper that he had created himself of stylized flowers. So it's flowers in front of flowers. And you can see when you look closely at his handling, it's very much the same way that Mildred approached her work, with the very painterly approach to the representation of the petals and the flower heads. They almost, in the hands of someone like Grant Wood, and in some cases in Mildred's work, they almost writhe. They're still very much alive. And so that was part of them. They did not want to show the flowers dying, although we all know cut flowers do die. They're showing them very much in sort of the full bloom, if you will, of their life. But that's not the kind of work that we know for Mildred Pelzer. We know her best for her murals for the Jefferson Hotel. And this is a commission that she received in 1934. She completed in 1934, and they were installed and opened in September of 1934. So it was a very, very busy year to create these 8 murals. Here is a very difficult to read installation shot of the lobby with the murals in place. And I think we'll need to point a few of them out. To the far right-hand side, right over here, is we build our Capitol. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. To the straight back, right here, you just barely make out the locating the Capitol, which is now lost. And to the sides that you see here, I believe, if I've been able to discern, that one of them is, I think, stage ready, the further one, and the nearer one, I believe, is the Railroad Arrives. But it's very dark and difficult to make all of that out. And as you have on the back of your brochure, which is really a lovely creation, I'm so glad that the library oversaw this, you'll see this listing of the original 8 murals. The first 2 are lost and feared destroyed. The middle 3 are the 3 that we own at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. The next 2 are the 2 that you can see here that are the part of the Longfellow School. And then the last one, Hold Your Horses, where there's no image available, is also feared destroyed. Inside this wonderful brochure is a reproduction of the original guide that was created by the Jefferson Hotel. It's a beautiful, it's full of beautiful prose. And I recommend to you to look at it. I'll be quoting from some of it because it's really, really helps to frame the work so beautifully. But I won't be talking so much about the roused bear and locating the Capitol because we can't see those. But we're going to start with Our First Families, which is one of the pieces that is owned by the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. You can see it's a disaster, okay? There's no other word for it. It is in desperate need of conservation. This work came to us from Dick Feddersen, who had acquired it and for a while hung it above his automobile repair area. And suspect a lot of that grime that you see there is a result of that. I want to read to you just a little bit about what you're seeing in Our First Family. So let me see, get to the right place. But soon you expect and see the first families, the men and women and children who founded homes. And then there's a lengthy poem, and I won't read that to you. This is how the piece really appears, but if you throw a flash on it, it cuts through the grime, and you begin to see what's underneath all of that sort of soot. You see leadmen and 2 steer pulling a wagon, children up in front, and here from the other side, the back, other settlers coming in from behind. And even though this is a terrible image, you get to see these wonderful 2 children in the foreground, one looking directly out at you to draw you in. It was a wonderful technique. It was a very, very kind of brilliant move on the part of Mildred Pelzer because it helps to engage you as the viewer and draw you into the composition. I should say that all of these works are quite different than the kind of florals that we've been looking at. The composition is much simpler. She's not interested in these painterly effects because these would have been positioned above your head. You would not have been able to see any of the details. And so she has what I would call a certain elegant simplicity to her figure types, and to the composition as a whole. This scene, and we'll back up here, you get the sense of forward motion. Not just because everything is directed in one direction, but they're actually stepping forward. Everything is moving forward. So for a static image, it's actually got a lot of movement infused within it. Much better condition is We Build Our Capitol from 1841. We Built Our Capitol 1841. Again, all of these are made in 1934. It says, draw closer to the fireplace and see the building of the first territorial capital. Begun in 1840, Old Capitol first housed the assembly in December 1842. Ox teams and boats transported limestone or Iowa City marble from nearby quarries. Hand labor with hand tools fashioned the stone and built the Capitol. Drawing near, you can hear the Commissioner Chauncey Swan and Father S.C. Mazzucchelli discussing a sketch of the State House, which is what you see in the center composition. The two principals, Chauncey and Father Mazzucchelli, holding an image. Father Mazzucchelli was trained, had come here from Italy, had settled in Dubuque, but was trained in architectural arts and was credited, according to some, with the design for Old Cap, which you see them building in the background. Here's a little bit closer detail where the principals have been placed dead center in the composition, and Father Mazzucchelli is pointing to what's going to happen next with the portico in the front. You can see here a little bit better the sense of figure type. Simplified form. Again, everyone is in a variety of positions. Pelzer must have studied models over and over and over again and placed them in a wide variety of positions in order to capture all of this. And that's true in all of her, in all of these murals in this series. And here's a sense of it now. Keep in mind, I'm going to back up here, so don't. This is 125 inches wide, okay? So it's just over 10 feet wide. So you get a sense, and it's a little bit bigger than 4 feet high. In context, when we installed this piece last for our American Century exhibition, which ran from 2009 to 2012, was kind of a selections from our permanent collection, all dealing with American art. We had this mural wall. On the far, far left of that mural wall, we see Grant Wood's study for one of his Iowa State University murals. We see Pelzer in the middle, and we see one of Grant Wood's corn murals on the right-hand side. And you get a sense that of the real size and grandeur of Pelzer's mural in this context. At Our City Landing is another tragedy, but it has a good ending. This is 142 inches wide, so it's even larger than the last one. But you can barely make out what you see there is a group of individuals and a paddle wheel boat in the Iowa. And it says, a low, mournful sound startles you away from the Capitol to the wharf where the steamboat Agatha docked in 1844. The Agatha was the third of 7 steamboat arrivals during the 40s. Please stand back as she discharges boxes and crates of goods. The barrels and kegs are not for a state store, but for a local merchant. Iowa City toasted captains, boats, and river. It wanted to have river traffic like Davenport or Bloomington, also known as Muscatine, rather than to wagon its goods to and from these ports. But such high hopes would not overcome the crooked bends and shallow waters of the Iowa. See, I can't write stuff better than that. That's why I quote it. It's just wonderful. It's just wonderful. This work was damaged in the 2008 flood. It was hung, both the previous not the previous mural, but Our First Families, the other one that was dark and grimy, hung above this one. This one was lower, and the waters that backed up into the museum affected the bottom 4 inches of this mural. So we sent it off to be conserved. Unfortunately, conservation costs exceeded the value by at least 3 or 4-fold. And so our insurer would not cover it because it well exceeded the value of the painting itself. However, we struck a deal with the Conservation Lab, and for a nominal amount, we had the painting cleaned, but not conserved. And here they go. So you can see that just by cleaning that grime off, you get this wonderful sense of the blues and the creams that you saw in We Build Our Capital, and that you will see in the railroad image as well. And this is just simply cleaning, not conserving or restoring. And there it is in the Conservation Lab in Chicago while it was being cleaned. And here it is coming back. Now, this is a little bit deceptive. It's not quite this vibrant. She was much more subtle in her palette, but the flash has made everything look quite vibrant. It actually looks more like this. And this is with a flash, so the middle sort of bleaches out, so I apologize for that. But you get a sense, the colors are much more harmonious than you saw in the last image. And here again, without the flash, without that bleached out center, you see this group of individuals welcoming the Agatha in 1844, a little bit sort of closer at the center section. So while there is still work that needs to be done in this, it is much improved, and is a real statement for what even just a simple cleaning can do for work. And here, Mildred was very clever in internally dating her paintings, not with the date that she made them, but the date that she's referencing. And so the Agatha from 1844 is listed right there, 1844. Obviously, the Agatha existed before 1844, but for her purposes, it is named so, right on the piece itself. And of course, stage ready. And I'm sorry, the image is a little bit small, a little bit blurry. As I tried to get it bigger, it just kept getting worse and worse, so I stopped. But this is one that you can see for yourself at the senior center. And this has also got a wonderful story. Let's see. A guest at the Park House or the Clinton House in Iowa City in 1855 heard the call. Stage ready. Band boxes and carpet bags were loaded on top, and 9 or 10 passengers wedged inside the 4-horse Concord coach. The fare to Des Moines was $10. Seems really high, I'm sorry. And at one tavern, a breakfast of fried pork, dried bread, and spring water cost 50 cents. Note the driver. The horses are being changed, and the frontier minister is bidding his farewells. Along the stage route, frequent stops were made to water the horses and to brandy the gentlemen. Again, I can't write stuff better than this. And here, I won't belabor this, we've talked a bit about this, and it's really remarkable to experience in person. I hope you all have a moment to go upstairs and see this, because what I find most fascinating is you can actually see Mildred Pelzer changing her mind in this piece. You can see, because she tended to paint thinly on these murals, you can see the underpaint. You can see that the words Mississippi and Missouri Railroad, 1855, to the left, there is lettering underneath that paint layer. It comes through. And these curious characters, right there, if you can see scoring on the canvas, they actually were probably holding a railroad tie going in the opposite direction. The figures are correct, but they actually had a railroad tie running this way over their shoulders. And you can see those lines on the painting itself. She's made a change and have them carrying wood, not wood, for the railroad ties because they're much too small, but wood for some other purpose, one presumes. But if you spend enough time with the work, and I would say that's true of all of Pelzer's work, you will see things emerge out of the canvas itself, which shows her working. And this too has a wonderful description. The iron horse brought changes. The railroad comes to Iowa City as an animated scene in a temperature of 25 below. The road was to receive a bonus of $50,000 if it could be brought to the Iowa City Depot on or before January 1st, 1856, which is why she dates the train 1855. On New Year's Eve, the engine was still 1,000 feet from the goal. Peter A. Day and LeGrand Byington, who graced us with his presence earlier, are urging the workmen to win the bonus. With only a few hours left, the engine froze up and was then pushed and pried on the track to the depot. The bells of the city pealed triumphantly. Both Iowa City and the Mississippi and Missouri Railroad had won the race. Wonderful. And we won't discuss the one that we can't see at all, the last one, the Hold Your Horses, which was the introduction of the automobile to Iowa City. But I want you to kind of keep in mind that at this exact same moment, Grant Wood is working on his agricultural science mural, in fact, all of the murals that he's doing for Iowa State University. And he approaches it in much the same way that Pelzer does, a very simplified form. This is the study for the agricultural science mural that we have at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. And then that's the final mural put in place. I mean, remember that these murals that you see that Pelzer is doing would have been part of architecture, would have been in an architectural setting, just as Grant Wood's murals are currently still at Iowa State University. Grant Wood was made the head of the Iowa PWAP in 1933. He oversaw a number of muralists, as we heard earlier. Mildred's murals were not part of that program. They were a direct commission from the Jefferson Hotel, and in that way are outside the whole rubric of the WPA. But this isn't the only mural that Mildred Pelzer did. She was commissioned to do a mural for Marion, Iowa, 1890. Here we see a study for that. We don't know if that mural was ever completed, but the museum in Cedar Rapids owns two studies for this mural. This was done the year after the murals for the Jefferson. Here's a little bit closer view. And from left to right, you can see she's written along the bottom. This is an oil on canvas that's now been mounted on board. She's written along the bottom what she represents. So from left to right, you've got the famed Cherry Sisters. Those are the two ladies in red. They were those two horrible singers that everybody went to see that hailed from Marion, Iowa. And then directly above them is the bicycle champion right there. That's noted right there. Okay. Then comes the Mincer drill team, famous between 1890 and 1910, which is what you see happening right there. And then the Champion Fire Company, which is right there, from 1888. The Hose Cart of Marion, which must have been quite a sight to see, I suppose, from 1890. And then the Marion Railroad Center, which is right over there. So it's interesting to look at this work and keep in mind the Railroad Arrives that she did for Jefferson, for the Jefferson Hotel. This is one of her studies for it, one of her proposals. This is the other. You can see that there's some similarities. The Cherry Sisters are still there, but they're not identified. I think that's right. There's no champion bicyclist there. The Metzger is, the Mincer is still there, the drill team. But what really takes prominence now is this whole center activity, and it's actually the famous campaign for the county seat that culminated in a celebration or a rally at the Railroad Center. This is why the Railroad Center was so important in this particular mural. Many people do not know that Marion, Iowa was the county seat for Lynn County from the time Lynn County was formed in 1839 until 1919 when it was wrested away from Marion by Cedar Rapids. And it was a contentious battle. Marion wanted to be the county seat, and Cedar Rapids wanted it, and it had grown enormously in the intervening times. And so this was a mural really to kind of celebrate Marion's history as being the county seat for Lynn County for some 80 years. And this is the Symphony of Iowa, the mural that graced the Iowa City Press Citizen building from when it was created in 1935. Now, again, there's this typical, wonderful Mildred Pelzer palette with her lovely greens and blues and wonderful harmonies here. This, again, is a picture taken with flash, so you kind of miss the middle. But what you have here is the state of Iowa. On the left is the Missouri, and on the right is the Mississippi. And in the middle, because it's the center of the universe, is Des Moines, okay? This is being telecast, isn't it? Yeah, okay. Well, I can kiss any state money goodbye. Right there, with the Capitol building. And I'm going to show you another picture here. This is garish, but it's a little clearer and gives you a sense. So in the foreground, you are part of this group of people from many different walks of life and from many different periods in time. And you're coming over this fabulous rise, which obviously has been furrowed and is growing crops, and you see Iowa. It's like seeing the promised land. You know, you're like Moses. You can't go there, but you can only look upon it from a distance. And so you've got this wonderful sort of distillation of the entire state in front of you. Now, I don't know if any of you noted, I'm going to go back. It's 80 by 121 inches. It's not a small piece. It's a very, very large piece. And it has a few minor conservation issues. There's some paint loss in some areas, but on the whole, it's a remarkable, remarkable mural and deserves to be better known. I'm going to zoom in here on the area of most importance. As you can see, we're looking at here we go, Iowa City right here, okay, and Cedar Rapids is up here. You see Bohemie people right there. I'm going to have to come around. Oh, everything's labeled. I make none of this up. You know, yeah, it says that. Yeah. And you got Iowa City here, right? Okay, you got the Amana colonies right here, 26,000 acres. Okay, Toledo, Tama, Indian Reservation, right up there. Okay, there's Benton. You know, you got your rivers, you know, coming together down here. It's wonderful to spend and look. She was extremely thorough in her research. And that's true of all of her murals. Even, you know, in her Marion, Iowa mural, she even had noted in the corner that she had drawn upon historical study, newspapers, histories, and many interviews. I mean, she, I think, being married to a history professor, was, from the very beginning, invested in making sure historical accuracy was being portrayed. Don't think I have another one. No. This is the mural that she did for the Waverly Post Office in Waverly, Iowa, from the next year. It's a very different composition, but you get that same wonderful arcing horizon, beautiful blues and greens. Here, a farmer is actually working the field. He's interrupted by his wife who's reading a letter. The child is desperate to be picked up. A wonderful sort of snapshot of everyday life. But, you know, in addition to this wonderful sort of arcing horizon, which is really sort of where you actually see the curvature of the earth in her paintings, these horses are so beautifully foreshortened She really did understand how to do foreshortening, and makes these her compositions so successful. This still is hanging in the Waverly Post Office, where it was intended. But she didn't just do murals. She also created this wonderful painting of Blair Hall. She was known for other sorts of landscapes, like you see here. Again, here, I think you see a little bit of that Impressionism working its way back in. It's a different kind of commission, so she's creating a different type of work with different style. This is not so big. It's 30 by 36, so people don't have to see it from a distance. They can get up close. And she utilizes her Impressionistic style here. It hasn't gone away completely. It hasn't been replaced by her mural style. She uses different styles for different purposes. And then as she progresses into the 60s, she goes further and further into abstraction. This is Carolina Picnic that's in a private collection. You can see it's kind of moody, atmospheric, sort of just abstracted objects placed in the foreground, sort of an expansive landscape behind. And somewhat similar is Untitled here in the collection, the Iowa City Public Library on the second floor, not far from where the mural's been installed. And it's interesting. When I was preparing, I was kind of flipping back and forth, like, wow, these look very, there's elements that are in the same place. There's verticals in the same place. There's horizontals in the same place. But actually, when you look at this composition in person, there's 4 abstracted figures that come forward that you don't see in this composition in this particular slide. For example, that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, and that's 4. And when you're standing in front of the piece, you'll see them much better than you see them on this slide. But it's wonderful how she's distilled these forms into abstraction, which is exactly the kind of thing that an artist like Marvin Cohn did, as he moved into abstraction, and oftentimes used very much the same sort of palette. Grant Wood did not, but he did not live long enough, I think, to explore abstraction, having died at the age of 50 in 1942. He didn't live through the 50s and into the 60s to explore what abstraction could have been in his hands. We can only guess at what that would have been. But this is, I hope, a little bit of an introduction to Mildred Pelzer, the woman, and Mildred Pelzer, the artist. And I hope that it helps to give you a little bit more context when you go to look at the murals that are in view here in Iowa City. So I thank you. Thank you.
Can I just stay up here?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
We'll take just a few minutes to see if there are questions. And if you have one, we need to speak into the microphone.
And do stay afterwards if you can, because we have some refreshments and some beverages, and if you have stories to share, we'd love to hear them. So you get to start.
Where is the Symphony of Iowa picture now?
The Symphony of Iowa mural is in the collection of the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. Yeah, we have it, and it's, like I said, it's mostly in good shape. The trouble with getting that one out is, of course, the size is one problem. Secondly, there is some flaking, so we have had some paint loss, and it's a painting that invites touch. Everyone wants to point at it, but to keep people, far enough away, say 5 or 6 feet, you can't see the details or the labels on everything. So it's sort of one of those things we need to get it stable and allow people to get, allow them to get closer to it.
I'm going to take a minute. I want to speak to that question, but to remind you that Bob Hibbs and Alexander Drayman from Johnson County Historical Society will be outside with Bob's books available for 1999. And one of the things to remember is he has donated the copyright and all of the proceeds to the Johnson County Historical Society, and it's a really interesting little book. And one of the stories in it relative to Symphony of Iowa is it too was a rescue. when Dick Feddersen, who found the murals, the Pelzer murals from the Jefferson in the furnace room of the old City Hall, but he called his friend Ed Green, who was then the editor of the Press-Citizen, looking for Symphony of Iowa. And the story is Ed found it rolled up in the basement of the Press-Citizen and gave it to Dick, who he and Ann spent their own money to restore it and then donate it to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art.
Do we know who wrote the brochure copy?
I do not know.
We assume it was Louis Pelzer, but that's nobody is absolutely certain, but since he was involved in the theme and obviously consulting with Mildred, our assumption is that it's his work.
The Press-Citizen article that I think you referenced from September 6th, 1934, that text was written by her husband, and it's very different than what's in the brochure, but he still could have done the other, but the text that's in the article, which it says he wrote, is just very straightforward, and it's not flowery at all.
Thank
So,
you.
not sure.
Thank
Little
you.
tidbit.
Sean, we took a tour of the State Historical Society library, and I think she did a map as well, right, Jenny? Are you familiar with the map that was done? I want someone to reproduce that map, and so we can buy it, because it's much like Symphony of Iowa, only it's more simple, but it has all of these wonderful parts of Iowa outlined in it. Did you have a question?
There is also, by the way, let me interject, and the timing of this is coincidental. In the entrance lobby of the Historical Society building, running right now is a little display about Mildred Pelzer and her work, courtesy of Randall Schroeder. And they have, that's where we located the original brochure, which was used to edit the one that you now have. They have other materials in their collection over there.
I wanted to know about the technique where you talked about how you can see former versions of the painting underneath. Was that a common technique for muralists at this time?
It depends on how the artist painted. And her top layer is fairly thin, so you can see some of the changes that she made underneath. And depending on whether how hard her edges were, you can see some of that. But go take a look upstairs and see if you can't see that coming through. You definitely can see the lettering coming through on the train itself. And then I see this very, very odd, peculiar, receding diagonal, which lines up perfectly with the men's shoulders, and at least speaks to me to say that she had a different thing in mind originally and changed it.
Is there another
I saw a hand
question?
in the back.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, I want to know if, do you get a price on how much it would cost to restore, like our first families? Completely restore it?
Let's see, the cost to restore, not our first families, but the one that we did have clean, let's see, the one at our city landing, cost to restore, that was $15,000. And the cost to just get it cleaned was $4,000 to $5,000. So, it was our hope that we would apply for a grant at some point to restore all of the murals, but that having partly cleaned, having cleaned this one, it would save us money in our grant application. So, but the value, they hadn't been valued recently. They only had a 1990s value of $2,500 on the mural, and the insurance company would not spend $15,000 to restore a $2,500 painting. I think that was obviously a little bit dated valuation, but there's practically no comparisons for these kinds of murals. So it would be difficult to get at a real fair market value anymore. But it was well beyond us, and we had the other one that needed conservation as well. So we figured it was made more sense to wait and apply for a grant and get them all worked on at the same time.
I think we can have one more question. And before I hand you the mic, I would really like to thank everyone who participated in this. It's just a wonderful event for Weber Days. And I do have two other Weber Day things that I'd like to point out. We have a program on Saturday where we're going to Hickory Hill, meeting at the upper part of Hickory Hill, and we're taking a tour to the pest house. So if you have any interest in smallpox, please join us. That's at 11 o'clock. And then next Wednesday at the same 7 o'clock here in this building, we will have a program on the history of Little Village, the weekly free newspaper in Iowa City. So one last question, did you?
Where exactly did she paint these murals? And how much did she get paid for those?
I have no idea what she got paid for them, but we understand that she painted them in the hotel itself, but not in place, but in one of the rooms of the hotel. It was summertime, it was hot, but she did it in a relatively remarkably short period, from like April of 34, and they were dedicated in September of 34. I think she spent about 2.5 months nonstop painting.
Fifth floor of the Hotel Jefferson, no air conditioning in 1934, using a towel wetted down in an ice bucket to keep her cool.
Well, thank you all for coming. Please do have some refreshments. And if you haven't gone upstairs,
I assume you'd like refreshments to stay in this room?
yes, please. Although you can eat and drink in the library now, it's modern times. The library and the senior center will be part of the gallery walk in
Thank you.
October.
Thanks for coming.
So come back and visit us again. And look at the other Pelzer work on the second floor, because they're very different, but you can tell that it's the same artist. Thanks for coming.